I'm wondering how concerned you are about a rising unemployment rate, realizing that participation drove that. But what is driving people to start looking for work?
Well, I think that I'd like to take a step back because we were just talking about the Fed and how they're going to think about all of this. You know, one of the really strange things about this is we usually would be talking, or would have been talking a couple of weeks ago, about October's jobs release. Right. And instead, just a reminder that today we're talking about September, and we're not likely to see an October job release.
It's canceled, they said, right?
That's
so is this
right.
too stale to matter?
It's not too stale to matter. It's still important to have this data. And one of the things that I'd also draw your attention to is we got revisions for the previous 2 months, which were slight downward revisions, bringing the overall rate of job growth over the last year to a very low level, a level not seen outside of recessions. That's worrying. The unemployment rate ticking up a bit is worrying. That long-term unemployment rate is worrying. But, you know, all in all, this is kind of in line with the story we've been seeing for months now of persistently high inflation above the Fed's target, accompanied by a softening jobs market that hasn't seemed to fall off a cliff yet, but unfortunately the jobs situation can go south very quickly and then can build on itself. The other piece is, you know, it seems like a million years ago that we were talking about Elon Musk and Doge, but those federal employees who were pushed out at the beginning of the administration by Doge through the fork in the road email, those folks started to roll off payrolls just as the government was shutting down, right? Because it was the beginning of the fiscal year. And that is the October jobs report that we are never going to see. And so I'm really concerned about what else is going on in the economy that we just have no insight into and won't until the next jobs report, which will be right around the time that the Fed is meeting again.
Well, Kitty, obviously an especially imperfect basket of data that we have right now, but this debate has been raging particularly all year about the data integrity. Are we measuring the economy properly? Of course, it's become a politicized debate as well. What are you watching? What alternative data or traditional data are you relying on right now to really kind of gauge where we're at?
You know, I think like everyone, I was looking to ADP and other private sector sources, but the truth is there is no private sector source that can match the government's statistical power. You know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out huge surveys where they contact many, many, many more people than any private sector survey can do. A lot of private sector data is, you know, it's administrative data from payroll processors, et cetera, but that's not necessarily a representative sample. So that's one of the reasons that many of us are so concerned about the politicization of the BLS is there's really no replacement for it.
When you see participation rise like this, is it because people are encouraged that there are more jobs to be found, or because they are suddenly having trouble making ends meet?
You know, it can be a combination of both. And actually, you know, labor force participation rate growth was one of the bright spots of the post-pandemic recovery.
Yes, right.
However, we saw a huge labor force participation drop off during the pandemic, understandably, rebuilding that sense that there are jobs out there and drawing people into the labor market. I think also really demonstrated how important it is to keep a tight labor market that can draw people off the sidelines. You know, for many years, especially after the Great Recession, there was this sense that we were just going to have to live with 5.5% unemployment, and you know, there was a lot of discourse about workers being unprepared or other things driving people out of the labor market. What we saw is when you have a really hot labor market where wages are growing and workers have some power to demand better working conditions, those jobs become more attractive and people are drawn in. I think on a month-over-month basis, it's pretty hard to tell what's going on.
So, Kitty, I want to ask about two big trends in one question, and that is the immigration crackdown as well as artificial intelligence. I'm wondering if anything out of this report or the data recently tell you about what the impacts have been most recently.
You know, I think it's still, again, I'd love to see October's data, and it's still a little bit difficult to tease apart some of these pieces. You know, we know anecdotally that the immigration crackdown is going to have effects on sectors like construction, other sectors that are heavily reliant on immigrant labor. I know here in Washington, D.C., there have been a lot of difficulties for restaurants and, many of these folks, it's not even that their employees are undocumented, it's that their employees are concerned about getting harassed on their way to work. It's really created a chill, I think, for those workers who kind of keep the city running. And I think that we're seeing that it doesn't necessarily show up quickly in the data, but we're seeing that in people's lived experience, especially in blue cities that have been targeted by the Trump administration for heavy ICE activity. In my own neighborhood, there are kids having to be walked to school by other adults because there's a lot of very aggressive activity.
Well, this points us to the affordability issue, if I can use that term. We call it costs, prices, inflation. The president's obsessed with the rhetoric right now and brought this up yesterday at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum at the Kennedy Center. He seems to think that somebody changed the wording here to have a political impact on the conversation. At least that's what it seemed to be he was suggesting. Let's listen to what he said. Here's the president.
We're also making incredible strides to make America affordable again. That's a new word that they're using, affordability. We're bringing prices down, but they came up with a new word, affordability. And they look at we are all about affordability, and everyone assumes that meant that, no, their prices were high.
They came up with a new word. Did you come up? Was he talking about you or Groundwork? Who did this?
Well, Groundwork Collaborative has been using affordability for quite some time now, so I am happy for us to take some credit. And I think that, inflation, we've talked about this before. Inflation is a word that has a very specific meaning inside economic circles, right? It's a percent change in the absolute price level across a basket of goods.
Wow, very good.
What people really care about is not how much prices have ticked up for that basket of goods in the aggregate over the last month. What people care about is whether they can make ends meet. Yeah. And the affordability crisis has really been brewing for quite some time. This has been a problem for American families across the country. And it's driven both by grocery prices and those sorts of things that we really saw shoot up during the inflationary period and that are still rising. But also it's driven by big ticket items like housing and healthcare. And, healthcare is a really good example because the government shutdown was really about trying to extend these really, really important subsidies. 24 million Americans get their health insurance on the Affordable Care Act exchanges, and they just saw their premiums for next year more than double on average. And this is hundreds of dollars a month for a typical family, and that is not something that they can afford.
So, Katie, I don't want to make you play the political consultant, but is affordability the most, people-friendly term that we can use? I mean, economists also often get bogged down in terms that are a little bit heavy for ordinary people that are just trying to, make ends meet. Inflation can be a very deep concept. Is affordability the best we can do in terms of attracting people to the idea that prices just need to get better and, I think a tagline here?
I think that if we're really talking to people, talking about the specifics of being able to afford your mortgage or your home insurance, being able to put food on the table, pay your rent, put a little away for a rainy day, get childcare, those are the pieces that people are really thinking about. And so, affordability is a word, but really it's trying to capture something deeper about people's experience and whether they can afford the things that they and their family need.
He also loves the word grocery. He was kind of working through that in the campaign. He says it's an old word, a strange word, a beautiful word. Grocery. In our remaining 30 seconds, is that where the president finds some relief, having lifted tariffs off a number of food imports, everything from beef to cocoa to coffee?
I mean, it's always welcome when a policymaker who has made an error corrects it. It's better than sticking with failed policy. Yeah. It is a little bit bizarre to see the president trotting out his relief from his own tariffs as a big part of his affordability agenda.
But if it brings relief, we'll take it, right?
We will see,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure it's going to bring prices down to where people need them to be.